stop you there, so don't feel weird or whatever. Let's start with where you started, because you started as a journalist, didn't you?
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
Well, I started as a horse racing journalist, which was about 25 years ago, I guess, and had a great time. Then decided to move into more general journalism and became a gossip columnist, if truth be told, on the Daily Telegraph, which is one of the main newspapers in London, where my boss was Boris Johnson. And we had a great time for 3 years on the Telegraph. And then eventually, after a while, when I started to have a family, I needed to earn a bit more money, and I went into marketing and public relations, and did that for quite some time. And it was really during that time that I started working for football clubs, giving them advice on marketing and public relations and this kind of thing. And then I got involved at board level with my local football club here, Oxford United, and really that was my entree into the world of football and how football clubs work.
Let's talk about Oxford Football Club, because that was your first foray into club management. Even though you didn't really own the club, you went in there to clean it up. Why is Oxford something so close to your heart? Why is it important that you went into Oxford Football Club?
As I sit here right now, I'm sitting in my house, which is in a village about 3 miles outside Oxford. My family have lived in this part of the world for at least 1,000 years, and this is really home. And I grew up going to watch Oxford United with my grandfather, who was a farmer, and he and his whole family. He had 13 siblings, and he and his whole family were Oxford fans. And we would go along to the old stadium together in the 1980s, when Oxford were actually in the top division, what's now the Premier League, and really that's what got me hooked. And ever since then, I've been an Oxford fan, and it doesn't matter which club I'll ever be involved with, I'll always be an Oxford United fan at heart.
You did mention that Oxford United were a League One club at the time, or they were in the top division at some stage.
That's right. During the 1980s, they were in the top division, yeah.
And what happened to them?
Well, effectively, what happened, Sasi, was they were owned by a guy who was at the time the biggest media tycoon in the world, a guy called Robert Maxwell, and he was in a big rivalry with Rupert Murdoch. He lost, and on one day in 1991 he fell off his yacht, never to be seen alive again. And that it turned out, of course, that all his companies had been mortgaged, including the football club. So the football club went bust, and really it took the club 10-15 years to recover from the numerous bankruptcies that came after his death.
Well, let's talk about Stuart Donald then. Was he involved at Oxford when you were there?
Yeah, he was our club sponsor.
How did you guys actually meet? Was it through the sponsorship that you developed a relationship with him?
Yeah, well, effectively, although Stuart and I are more or less the same age, and we grew up obviously in the same part of the country, and we have friends in common, and we both played football when we were younger. So we knew of each other for a long time, but it was really when we both came together at Oxford United in around about, I suppose, 2008, 2009, that we started to know each other better.
Let's talk about him then. I mean, what's his background? Because he came across as a guy on the show that, wears his heart on the sleeve. He wants the best for the football club, highly strung. You saw in cases where the guy was emotional wreck. How is he like as a person?
That's just what he's like. He's a lovely guy. He's like a teddy bear, Stuart. When it comes to business and numbers, he's very acute, very sharp. When it comes to sport and his family, it's all emotion. And I think he finds separating the two very, very difficult. And I think I found the year that you see on Sunderland Till I Die season 2, I found quite stressful, but I think Stuart found it a lot more stressful.
Absolutely. I think when you look at the owners, right, you guys were living it because you didn't want to leave anything to chance. But let's talk about how the opportunity of taking over Sunderland came about. I mean, it's not every day that you get an opportunity to take over a football club, and a club as big as Sunderland Football Club in the Northeast is one of the biggest clubs in the UK as well, right? So how did that opportunity come about?
So really, Stuart and Juan Sartori, our other partner, and me have been sort of looking for a club to buy. We tried to buy Oxford. For one reason or another, that didn't quite happen. And we sort of had our eye open to see which other club we might buy. And we assumed it would be a club more or less a similar size to Oxford, a medium-sized club, which if you did well and you ran it well, it could become a championship club. Maybe if you were really, really lucky, you might get to the Premier League, but probably not. And we thought it would be some fun, but it wouldn't sort of form a huge part of our lives. What happened was Sunderland, who had been relegated from the Premier League to the Championship, then got relegated from the Championship to League One, and they'd done so badly that they were already relegated a month before the end of the season. And at this point, their owner, who was a guy who I know, a guy who I've done work for in the past, was told by his family, okay, that's enough. We don't like to see the amount of stress this is giving you in your life. He's a very rich guy, and his family has said to him that you need to sell it. You must sell that club. So he was sort of almost given like a deadline by his family to sell it. And because it had been relegated twice, and because it was in a very big financial mess, the usual candidates for buying a club of that size just wouldn't touch it, right? I mean, a normal candidate for buying Sunderland would be a very rich guy, often an American or a Russian or maybe a Middle Eastern guy. And for them, buying a club in the third division is not a big ego boost, and they tend to like to show off their asset. So Sunderland was in this strange position of being this huge club in big financial difficulties in the third division, and it just gave us that one-off opportunity as relatively young English guys. It gave us this one-off opportunity to own a club and try and have the challenge of turning around a club that big.
I want to quickly talk about the fit for ownership, because right now we're seeing Newcastle in the brink of takeover. Huge money is coming through the Middle East and stuff like that, which you are kind of used to because you're working for the Bahraini royal family at some stage with communications and stuff like that. Were you inclined to go to a Middle Eastern investor to come and take over Sunderland, or do you felt that Stuart and Juan Sartori were the right people to take over the club?
Well, we were kind of operating as a group anyway, so I don't think really, it didn't occur to me to speak to other people because we were sort of operating as a team. But also, as I said, I don't think that those kinds of owners really want to own a club in the third division, however big it might be. They want to have a club that's either in the Premier League or else is in the Championship, but in a position where it could go in the Premier League. And I think really that's the challenge at Sunderland, is to turn it into the kind of club that kind of person would want to buy.
I'm really interested to know, at the stage when you guys were negotiating, the due diligence would have been quite amazing, because you guys knew that the club was in such a hole, right? And football clubs are generally bleeding, and Sunderland was no different. Before you guys took over, they were
Sunderland was different. It was bleeding more than any other club had ever bled. I mean, it was losing £35 million a year. And clubs just don't lose that amount of money. It's just astonishing. I think over the course of the previous 8 or 9 years, the club had lost £280 million.
And was that easy for the previous owner to just sit back? Because in the first series where we saw, he was completely hands-off, left everything to the CEO to run, and he seemed to be under a lot of stress. And when you guys, obviously, did you watch the first series? I'm pretty sure you watched the first series.
Yeah, I mean, we appeared in the final episode of the first series. Yeah, we saw it. But of course, the first series only appeared on Netflix when we were already 6 months into our ownership.
Right.
So yeah, of course we saw the first season, and it was quite fun in a way just to be able to sit back and enjoy the first season, knowing that we weren't the subject. And that obviously was something that changed with season 2. But yeah, Ellis had owned the club for 11 years. And I think during that time, he'd had some good times. They'd been in the Premier League for most of that time. They got to a cup final. They finished in the top 10 in the Premier League once or twice, etc. So it wasn't like he had a really bad time for the whole of his 10 or 11 years at the club. But in the last 3 or 4 years, things really started to spiral out of control. And he made a series of bad appointments to various different positions. And in a way, the worse things got, the less involved he wanted to be. And the more he put his head in the sand. And of course, the more he put his head in the sand, the worse things got. And the worse things got, the more he put his head in the sand. And the thing just got worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where in the end it just exploded.
Let's talk about the first couple of days that you guys actually took over. Would have been really interesting, because new owners, you want to get in there and make sure that you stamp your authority. What was the order of the day? What was the first thing that you guys did? Because it was quite clear, right? Because your job was to go there and fix the marketing communications. That's what your background was.
Well,
And
I actually I had to. That came a bit later, really. That the first thing we had to do was fire a lot of people,
right.
and that was a pretty tough process. We probably let go around 140 people. The club had been employing just over twice as many people as Newcastle, the next door club. The club had been employing more people than Tottenham Hotspur, and yet it was in the third division. I tell the story about the first day when I turned up for work. I was coming up from London, and I spoke to the office in Sunderland. They said, well, we'll have you picked up from the railway station. And I turned up at the railway station, and I expected a taxi or whatever, and I had my £20 note ready to pay the fare. And this limousine rolled up, and a liveried chauffeur stepped out wearing a full Sunderland livery. And I was like, oh, wow. He was a lovely guy. It wasn't his fault that he was in this position, but the club was in the third division and was employing 3 full-time chauffeurs.
That's amazing, isn't it? So
they're actually Sasi. They're actually paying a consultant to rearrange the pot plants in the office. I mean, the level of spending had just got totally out of control, and they were all living in this what I call Alice in Wonderland world, where they thought this was normal. They thought it was normal to be at a third division football club. When you wanted to go to the shop, you called on the chauffeurs to take you to the shop. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So the first month was really difficult on an emotional level, because unless you're a psychopath, which Stuart and I aren't, I hope.
That's not what you came across on the show, though.
You don't enjoy firing people, really. You know, it's not their fault that they're in a position where the business can't afford them. It's not their fault. They're not the people who appointed themselves. They're not the people who gave themselves these big salaries, etc. So the first month was really tough. Every night you went to bed knowing that another 20 people had their livelihoods taken away from them. But we had to tell ourselves that this is the only way to save the jobs of the ones who are going to stay, because otherwise the club was going to go bust.
You and the management team, the ownership group, you guys didn't come from the Northeast. You guys were Londoners, right? And that must have been really hard.
I mean, Stuart and I are both from Oxford. And Oxford is a quintessential southern county. It's very, very different down here. This is an agricultural area, other than the university, of course. It's an agricultural area, and people speak slowly. They walk slowly. They do everything slowly. And then you go to the northeast, where people talk really quickly, form opinions really quickly, discard opinions really quickly, and everything happens at a totally different tempo up there.
And how did you manage to, I mean, I'm going to touch on a little bit on your leadership skills and how you guys manage it, because you're coming in, these guys obviously been there for a long time. You need to clean house, and you know that you're going to upset a few people. Were you worried that you're going to break the fabric of the club when you went in, or you were already prepared to do that?
I think our view was that it was thoroughly broken already. And really, we had to ground zero it. And we knew we were going to break it, but we felt that we had to break it to put it back together again. The current work culture just wasn't sustainable. You know, in third division clubs here, which is something I have quite a lot of experience of because of Oxford, most clubs work on a shoestring, right? I mean, you know, you'll find a club has the first team, the youth team, and then like about 7 or 8, maybe 10 people working off the pitch. There'll be one guy who does marketing communications and the match day program. There'll be one guy who's the groundsman, but also has to act as the maintenance man. There's another guy who's the club secretary, but also acts as the finance director. You know, everyone's doing 2 or 3 jobs, just trying to keep things going. So really, whilst you could never get Sunderland to be that kind of model because the infrastructure is too big, there's too much to look after, too much to be done. Nonetheless, that they were employing 280 people when most of their rival clubs in that division were employing 10. So we didn't really feel it was sustainable to try and tinker around the edges, to try and sort of, mollycoddle people along in the pretense that everything was okay. We felt, no, okay, we're going to have to really break this and then try and save what's worth saving and what we need to save, and then put it back together again in a new model.
Let's talk about the manager because last week on my show I had Kit Simons, who was the assistant to Chris Coleman. We are good friends. We are good friends, and we go a while back. And I posed this question to him because I asked him what was your time like at Sunderland, and he did mention that he had a good time, but they were a little bit unlucky with injuries and stuff like that. You guys installed a new manager. Were you guys that appointed the manager that came in, or he was already there when you guys got there?
No, we appointed a new manager. I mean, Chris Coleman and Kit Simons are very respected managers, but they were part of the cost base that just couldn't be sustained. I mean, Chris Coleman, when you've got to the semi-final of the European Championships, you don't work for a third division salary. You work for a Premier League salary and all the accoutrements that come with a Premier League salary. And again, we felt the club had to rebase. We really felt very strongly that the club couldn't pretend to be a Premier League club anymore. If it's going to succeed, it has to understand and comprehend the competition that it's actually in, and almost have enough respect for your competition to then be able to succeed. So we really needed a manager who was going to be excited by being in the third division, because it was a step up for him to manage Sunderland, and who would come into that job with fresh, positive energy and would help us with our reset, if you see what I mean.
How much of the technical input did you guys give in terms of, you've taken over the club, you know that the most important thing is to get promoted. That's number one. You need to do that, because when you win on the pitch, everything else falls in line. And how much impact did you guys, or input did you guys have on the playing side of things, the technical side of things?
Well, do you know what? I generally speaking, what you say might be true, but in this case, actually, it's not true. In this case, the most important thing was to sort out the business side of the club, because otherwise the club was going to go into bankruptcy very quickly. And the business side of the club, of course, is partially affected by what happens on the pitch. But in actual fact, really, it was the cost base that was the problem. So, yes, I had a task to increase revenues. And in the job of increasing revenues, I was going to be helped if things could be at least positive on the pitch. But really, the big thing was reducing the cost base, because otherwise you cannot be successful on the pitch if you're bankrupt. It's not possible. The Football League penalises you 15 points and you go to the bottom of the division. So that was task number one. Task number two, as you say, and the dream, effectively what season 2 examines was the dream. Could we somehow repair this broken business on the one hand and get promotion at the same time on the other hand? And that was, in a way, that was the dream. We thought it would probably take 2 years, but the dream was that it would happen in 1 year and that everyone would then come together, be super positive. So when it came to matters on the pitch, really, I had, as you could probably tell from season 2, I had almost no input whatsoever in terms of what happened on the pitch. Whilst I love football and I played football, albeit not to as good a level as you, but I played football to a reasonable level. Stuart played football to a good level. But you're generally best advised leaving these things to professionals. And you tend to get a slightly strange dynamic within a club when the board get too involved in the football side of things, because no one's quite sure who's making the decisions. So really we franchised out most of the decision-making on the football side to the manager and to the other football professionals at the club, and really set the budgets for them to work within. Of course, as you saw, where that changed was in the January transfer window. And probably the result of that tells you why people from the board shouldn't get too involved in football decisions.
We'll come to that, because that's one of the amazing scenes in that series. But I want to talk about during the show, there was a figure that was thrown around all the time: 20 to 30 million a year Sunderland was losing. And I know when you came in, you said we got to make sure that we stop this bleeding. 20 to 30 million, it's a lot of money. You mentioned about chauffeur-driven cars and all of that. But where was this majority of the money going? If you're bleeding 30 million, is it to player wages or all of these small costs that really add up?
Both. Yeah, it was both. Obviously, we had a huge playing wage bill of players who had been recruited in the Premier League and given Premier League salaries, but who had then, just carried on hoovering up their big salaries while the club, got relegated twice. And then you had this huge number of small costs, and some of them quite large costs as well. And then, of course, the revenues weren't good enough either. So that's where losses come from, is when the costs, aren't met by the revenues. So really, we inherited revenues of £15 million a year and costs of £50 million a year. And my job was to try and equalize these two at around 20 million, to try and get the revenues to increase to 20 and to try and get the costs reduced to about 20.
And, I got to ask you, because there are a lot of people listening in. They are all football people. Some of them actually run clubs. They've got, a couple of questions here. They say, Darren Teo, he says, my idol. He says, my idol, you are his idol because he probably works for a club as well. And let's see, there are a lot of messages. Some are for later. I'll come back to some of the questions later. But so when you look at that 20 to 30 million, like I said, players' wages these are contracts. You can't just turn up and say we're going to cancel contracts, can you?
No, I think that was quite a complex piece of work. It was on a case-by-case basis. There were some players, honourable players, who wanted to leave, who felt, look, even if I have to take a bit of a pay cut, I want to play at the highest level I can possibly play. And it was a case with those players of trying to find them the right club to for them to go to. And there were several examples of that. A top player from the last World Cup, Wabi Kazri, the Tunisian playmaker. Wabi was very clear. I want to play in top division football, and if it means I earn less, that's fine. I just want to play at a great level of football. So he went to Saint Etienne, and we received, I think, 6 million from Saint Etienne, and that was very helpful. But Kazri was right from the start, very football orientated. It's all about football. Money comes afterwards. I'm not interested in money. It's about football. And then you had other types of players who are like, well, no other club is going to pay me what my contract at Sunderland is, so I'm going to stay here. And in some cases, I think that meant indicating to them in the most tactful way possible that their life at Sunderland from now on was probably not going to be all that enjoyable, and that probably they would be best served by looking elsewhere, and that they were under an illusion if they felt that Sunderland was going to carry on being this like easy place to be for guys on big money. That it would probably be a bit more uncomfortable than that. And of course, in two or three of the players' cases, we actually we fired them and then sued them. So it was a case-by-case basis, but somehow in the end, we did it.
I want to talk about Jack Rodwell because I'm an Everton fan. He's an ex-Everton player. So in the first series, it's quite clear that he was on a lot of money and he didn't want to move. He didn't want to move. Yeah,
he was £60,000 a week.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. So especially for a third-tier team, where the average wage is what, £1,700 to £2,000 a week. Right. So he's on like 50 times of that. So
he was on Jack Rodwell's annual salary was more than the average entire squad budget in our division.
Wow, that's amazing. So you had to deal with that, right? Because he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to go on a transfer. How did you guys deal with him?
Well, we spoke to him and we spoke to his representatives. And for some reason, he decided that he didn't want to be part of Sunderland anymore after those conversations.
Right? Okay. That's it. As simple as that.
Well, I think that... Yeah, I think it was indicated to him in those conversations that probably he wouldn't enjoy himself. It would be tough.
Right. Were there any clubs in for him? I'm pretty sure because he's a Premier League player, England international at some stage, I believe, or at least under 21 international at some stage. I'm pretty sure Championship clubs or Premier League clubs would want a player like that.
I think the problem is that by then his reputation had really deteriorated and had got to the point where a lot of clubs were very wary of a player who had a reputation for not being that enthusiastic about playing football. And I think Sunderland Till I Die season 1 really hurt him in that way. Right. But nonetheless, in the end, he did get a club. He went to Blackburn, and I think since then he's gone somewhere else. But, it's fundamentally, for all of us who have ambitions for English football, it's been a disappointing career. Because when he came through at Everton, obviously, as you know, he was very much reckoned to be potentially the next big thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then made the move to Man City where he didn't really play. And then after that, he made the move. But let's talk about the season. Because when you guys took over, the start of the season was quite good, wasn't it?
Yep, it was.
And did you feel that at any point that, with the start of the season, did you feel that this is going to happen for you guys, or you have that quiet, you got this, I would say, the quiet confidence that things are going our way, new management, new impetus, new energy. Did you at any point feel that this is going to be your season?
Yes, I think there was a period in October and November. We always felt the start was going to be difficult because when the new manager came in, effectively he only had 6 or 7 players left. So we had to bring in a lot of new players very, very quickly, which obviously makes it difficult to really focus on getting the right players because you're just trying to fill a team, really. And we felt that the first month or two would be difficult because of just trying to get a disparate group of players to gel together. And we got through that 2 months in quite good nick, actually, in quite a good situation. And then things really started to pick up in October, November. And I think the team won something like 7 or 8 games in a row. And at that point, you think, okay, we're coming up towards January. In the January transfer window, we're going to have some funds to invest. Other clubs in this division don't have any money. Because by this point, really, I'd managed to turn the business around to the point where you could be a bit more... you could look forward with a bit more confidence on the cash flow side. And you really thought, okay, look, we're third in the division, having been through a really traumatic time. We've got some money to spend in January, and this is starting to feel like it could be positive.
Let's talk about your relationship with your staff, because in that series, there were times that you were really upset with people. Is that because the frustration came because you were so driven and people around you were just dragging their feet on things that needed to get done because you were coming here to turn things around and they were still stuck in their old ways?
Well, that would be my version of events. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that's how some of the people who left the club would characterize it. They'd say I'm unreasonable and difficult to work for, I'm sure. And probably there's an element of truth in both. I think there are different ways of leading, and really there's no right way or wrong way. You have to judge whether it was the right or wrong way by the results at the end of it. And really the culture that I grew up in, I think maybe you and I are similar ages, was in a different age to modern management theory. Really the age I came into in sports and in the newspaper world was an age where leaders were expected to show a strong example themselves, and to be pretty forthright about how they expected other people to follow them. And people either followed or they didn't. And if they didn't, then it was relatively straightforward. They would leave the business or leave the newspaper or leave whatever it might be. And I've tried to modify my style over time, but under pressure, it tends to revert to more that kind of style. And it's not a question of wanting people to agree with you. In fact, as you probably would have noticed during Sunderland Till I Die season 2, one of my big tests of the kind of people I want around me are people who challenge me. I want people who say, actually, boss, I don't agree with you. I think we could do it better this way or we could do it better that way. But the kind of person I don't want is the kind of person who says we can't do it. I think there was a bit in the series, I haven't seen the season for some time, but there's a bit in the Netflix series where someone says, Charlie doesn't like to be told no. Well, that's true. I don't. I don't like to be told no. I like to be told either, yeah, I can do that, or else we can do it better this way, or else, look, we probably can't manage that, but we can achieve something else which is just as good. What I don't want are people who come into work trying to already find excuses before they've even sort of tried to do something.
Were you there day to day, in the sense that were you there every day on a day-to-day basis running the operations, or did you just turn up on match week?
I was there about 4 days a week.
Okay, coming up from London.
Yeah, or from Oxford.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. So did you? Let's fast forward a little bit, because I want to talk about that the transfer window, because that is a pivotal moment in that. I know you got your hand on your face because Josh Maja. Because when you said that 7 games in a row, this guy couldn't stop scoring. He was scoring, and I want to take a step back, because the way his contract was structured, it really shows how the club was run before, because he came through the ranks, didn't he?
Yeah, he came through the academy, and I think the problem is that as he started to become more closer to the first team, let's say, at the age of maybe 17, 18, That was really the moment at which the club started to fall apart. And the club started to try, obviously, you understand this, started to try to make savings, although, as I've said earlier on, I'm not sure they made savings in the right area, but in the areas, but nonetheless, the club started to try and make savings. And I think one of the areas where they tried to be a bit more cautious was in offering young players long contracts. So when Maja got offered his first contract, it was a 2-year contract. Whereas normally, if you had a player of that kind of promise, you'd want to get them tied down to certainly a 3 to 4 year contract with an option of another year and with various safeguards, etc. So what had happened was that by the time we got to the club, he had 1 year left on his contract. Now, the mistake at this point, he had not yet become properly prominent, right? He played 4 or 5 games for Chris Coleman the previous season, had scored 1 goal. And yeah, he probably could have got a move to another club, but it wouldn't have been on good money. It probably wouldn't have been a club as big as Sunderland. So really the mistake that we made was, say we as a whole management team, not that it was really my area of responsibility, but as a board, you have to take collective responsibility. The mistake we made as a management team was allowing him to start playing for the first team before getting him tied down to another year on his contract. And it was a great lesson to learn. Easy to say with hindsight, because probably 9 times out of 10, the guy doesn't go on to become a superstar. But in retrospect, if the guy is going to be starting as your main striker and he's 19, then there's at least a chance that he's going to become successful for you. That's why you're paying him as your striker when he's 19. And you've got to at least believe enough in that to say, well, look, he's not on big money at the moment, so it's not going to cost us a lot of money to extend before he starts scoring goals.
Because my wife, when she was watching, she said, it just sounds to me as though they should have signed the player. I mean, she's nowhere near football management or anything. So she just picked it up. They should have signed him earlier. So it does look as though it was poor management in the end. But the desperation, at any point did you guys suspect that he was gonna leave? Because during the show, it looked as though it was obviously produced in such a way that there was a cliffhanger all the way through. Whether will he stay, will he go? I can understand from a TV perspective, but did you guys knew that he was leaving from the word go, or was this a surprise right at the end?
I heard I was probably the first person to hear it, funny enough, although I'm not really involved so much on the football side, but as a friend of mine who's a Nigerian football agent who knew Maja's agent, who's also Nigerian, and in September when he'd scored 4 or 5 goals already, he said to me, look, you need to be careful. That agent has got a track record of taking players overseas, and that's a way of avoiding paying proper transfer fees in the English rules, European club rules. So I then relayed this information internally. I said, look, I'm told by a contact of mine in the agency scene that this could happen. And at that point, I think, the conversations were starting with his agent, but it became clear quite quickly that the agent didn't really want to commit to a proper conversation until he saw whether his client would keep scoring. Now, if we'd been strong, we would have just taken him out of the team and had that conversation with his agent whilst he was not playing. But in some ways, as your wife said, it was almost too late by then. The horse had bolted and the stable door was open, and it would have been difficult to put it back in again. So we were left in a situation where we could either keep him and keep playing him until the end of the season, then he could leave for nominal compensation, £200,000, or else we could try to cut a deal through his agent to try and recoup some money in the January transfer window. And in the end, the decision was taken by Stuart that we should let him go and recoup our £1.5 million.
Did the fans kind of blame him, or did he blame the management for Maja leaving?
I think it was a mixture of both, but normally fans blame the player because their view is that the player should want to play for their club. And once the player has basically demonstrated that he doesn't want to play for the club, then the fans tend to turn against that player. This isn't just about Sunderland, this is about clubs in general. So I think that in general terms, we were given a fairly, not an easy ride on that, but a bit of a free pass. The problem came, but the assumption was, okay, but you're going to now need to replace him.
Yeah.
Really, the problem came when we spent a lot of money replacing him, and then the player who replaced him didn't score as many goals as him. And then with hindsight, the fans then start to look back and say, well, you should have just kept him.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that's what fans do, right? Do you blame him? Because he went from League 3 to League 1 in France to play for Bordeaux. Do you blame him? Because he's a good player,
No,
right?
I don't blame him at all. I think if I was looking at it totally from a neutral perspective, it was the right move for the player. I mean, he scored whatever it is, 10 goals in 30 games in the French top division. So he's playing football at the very close to the top level, playing against, Paris Saint-Germain and Monaco and these types of places, and developing his game at a crucial time in his career. He's 20 now. Would he be better off playing against Paris Saint-Germain and Marseille, or would he be better off playing against Shrewsbury Town and Accrington Stanley? I mean, realistically, or even in the Championship against, whoever, Queen's Park Rangers or whatever, if he got us promoted, he'd still be a Championship player. I think it was the right move for the player, and it was the club that made the mistake twice, because ultimately the club didn't commit to the player early enough. And once you've given up that, then there's no real reason why the player should need to show you loyalty after that.
Let's talk about Stuart trying to replace Maja, because that in itself was a huge, I would say, I kind of thought that was the one of the turning points of the whole show, because it really showed the underbelly of professional football and really showed how clubs really prepare to negotiate. And we always talk about the transfer deadline, and we always wonder, why do they have to do the deal on the last day when you have like a whole month to do that, right? And what was the thinking? I'm pretty sure you were close to those conversations with Stuart and the footballing team. And every time, it was Wigan, right? Greeks from Wigan that they were looking to bring on. And every time you put a bid in, they push. Do you get a feeling that they knew that you guys were desperate for a striker?
Yeah.
Yeah, simple as that, yeah?
It was simple as that. I mean, I think, again, in retrospect, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, but really the football recruitment team should have had a choice of 3 or 4 strikers. And they should have been having offers in for all of them from an early stage in January. And then that would have put, if you did want to sign Grigg from Wigan, then that would have put Wigan in a position where they had to decide, okay, do we want to risk that Sunderland actually go and just buy a different striker and we don't sell Grigg at all? Because Grigg wasn't in their first team. So, they wanted to sell him fundamentally, whatever they said. They wanted to sell him, but they obviously were skillful at understanding that Sunderland hadn't got other irons in the fire, and that therefore they could push them. So, again, it's a harsh lesson to learn for the football guys who work around Stuart. But you can't go into these discussions and conversations with only one iron in the fire. You need to have many more options than that.
I want to take this question here because, as a fan, Gurisman Singh, he says, were you as keen to get Will Griggs as Stuart was, especially at that inflated price?
No.
No, okay.
I think you can tell that from the series. I mean, the only bit that I get involved at all is you see me in the room with the head of recruitment, and I say, I think now's the time to step back, don't you think?
Yeah.
That was at 1.5. No, it was very difficult from my perspective, because I'd worked really hard to increase the revenues and get the costs down, and £3 million was a huge sum of money given the work that I've been doing in terms of the cost reduction and the revenue raising. It was sort of that was a big chunk of what we'd effectively made, and really until then I don't think we'd ever envisaged spending more than £300,000 or £400,000 on any player. Maybe 500,000 at a push. Bear in mind, in League One, really, that not many transfer fees are paid at all.
Yeah.
And if there are transfer fees, it's normally 150,000, or maybe for a striker 300,000, maybe for a young striker who's going places, maybe 400,000. But really, no club in League One ever pays £1 million. So when when it went to 1.5 million, as you could probably see, I think it's actually one of the few bits in the series where you see me looking very nervous. I was like, do you think we should step back a bit from this now? I think maybe this isn't going in the right direction. So when I then found out later that we were paying 3 million, I was just like, oh, wow. Okay, right. Well, I suppose we've done it. And now let's hope that this turns out to be the best decision we ever made, because we get promoted and we look back and say, okay, yeah, we overpaid by 1.5 million, or 2 million, but in the end we got promoted, which is worth a lot more than 2 million. So that was a great decision. That's what you then want to happen, right? And when it, obviously it didn't happen, and it's easy now to look back. For those of us who didn't make that decision, it's easy to look back now and say, well, of course it was a bad decision. Well, yeah, sure, it was a bad decision. That's clear. But it's not quite as clear at that moment before the football's played on the park that it is a bad decision.
Because it does look as though it was kind of a desperate deal. Like there were no more strikers left. You had no one else. And you got this guy that you have to buy. And you got to pay, a price that's inflated. You know that it's not worth that kind of money. And in the end, he had a really tough time because he was under pressure. Will Griggs was under pressure to come and perform. And the fans, slowly started, turning their back against the player. But let's talk about the goalkeepers, because I have John Burridge, whom you might know. He played in the UK over 800 games, former Manchester City. Yeah. So he sent a message. He said, there were 2 goalkeepers in Singapore that would have got you out of trouble, Hassan and Izwan, because he says your goalkeepers were horrible. He's probably right.
I think he's talking about season 1. Season 2, our goalkeeper was the goalkeeper of the year last season in League One. He became a full international with Scotland and had a fantastic season. I think he's referring to season 1 when the club just couldn't get a goalkeeper and they kept on letting the ball through their fingers and this stuff. I think our goalkeeper made like 2 mistakes in the whole season last year. Our problem last year, our defence was fundamentally okay. We just couldn't score enough goals in the end. Once Maja went, we couldn't score enough goals. And we ended up drawing a lot of games 1-1.
That's right.
And it was that continuous stream of 1-1 draws that killed us, because I think we had something like 19 draws in the season. And if instead of having 19 draws, we'd had 10 draws, and even of the remaining 9 games, we'd actually lost 5 and won 4, we actually would have been promoted.
Yeah.
So it was that failure to be able to, really have games where you take the chances and you score a few goals and you win 3-0 and you move on. Even if you then lose the next game 2-0, actually that's better than drawing both games 1-1. And that was really our problem in the end.
There's another comment here from Sasi Kumar, who's a former player here in Singapore. He said, Charlie, you were the star of the series, really. And obviously there were some staff that were not happy with you or the way that you went about doing your business. Let me pull that up again, which is really needed. Do you regret doing certain things with regards to being tough on your staff?
Well, I think you always analyse yourself and think, could I have done that better, right? So even if at times you're tough on the staff and you think it's right to be tough on the staff, sometimes you think, well, could I have got a better reaction if I'd done it in a different way, right? So, yeah, there are times when I show my impatience, and impatience isn't a good quality. It's good to be strong and it's good to be tough on people in a good way, but impatience is impatience. It's not a good thing. So, yeah, sure, there are times when I look at my performance and think, despite the pressure I was under, despite everything that was going on, I wish I'd been able to be more level-headed.
Let's talk about the match day experience, because on one part of the show, you wanted to change the traditional song into Ibiza style music in the club. You wanted to make, yeah, you did. Yeah. So how hard was it for you to convince people around, especially fans and everyone, because there was one part where the fans came in and music blaring was almost looked like a rave going on, and fans were just looking at each other going, what's happening here? How hard was it for you to change that mindset and, of course, obviously, the match day experience? Yeah,
well, fundamentally, Sunderland over the previous 5 years had been the most unsuccessful club in British football history. Okay, so what had happened was they had lost 28 more matches than the next least successful club in England over a 5 year period. They went one whole calendar year without winning a single home match. So the failure had become very, very deep set in the culture of the place. And I felt that really we needed to ground zero everything and build a new reality where people could believe at some deep and emotional level that from now on things are going to be different. And this is going to become a place where we come to watch the team win football matches. And it's going to be a more positive and upbeat atmosphere. And we're not going to be living in the past anymore. Now, the music is just a part of it, but it's quite emblematic. It's quite, it sets a tone. It says something about what you're doing and where you're going. And I almost wanted to shock people out of their old habits. You know, what had happened at Sunderland was they'd started to arrive at matches 5 or 10 minutes after the start of the match and leave matches 5 or 10 minutes before the end of the match. And even at half time, a lot of them would leave the main stadium 5 minutes before half time to go and have a drink and would come back 5 or 10 minutes after half time. Fundamentally, they'd ended up having a deeply negative view of the experience of watching football in that stadium. So by changing the seats, changing the music, changing sort of what the concourses look like behind the seated areas, changing some of the food, etc. I just wanted to get a sense, okay, this is a new beginning. And you know what? It worked. You know, attendances really boomed. And after about 3 months, like Stuart doesn't like the rave music, right? And after about 3 months, Stuart tried to change the music one match when I wasn't there. And everyone went crazy and said, we want our rave music back. So it then came back.
That's a great segue to my next question. But before I do that, Sam Blakely, he says, any recommendation on books for management and leadership?
Not many who recommend to do it how I do it.
That's a good one.
I mean, I've read quite a few of these books, and I try and remember what they all tell me. But it tends to end up me just going back to what I learned growing up on newspapers. And really, what I learned growing up on newspapers was that if you want to be surrounded by good people, reward good behaviors, right? I think that Netflix tried to focus in on some of the disconnect between me and one or two of the members of staff. But what they perhaps didn't show was towards the end, I have a conversation with the head of media there. And he was somebody, a young guy, talented young guy who decided, you know what, this is great. I want somebody who sets high standards and who challenges me. And I'm going to now improve my performance and I'm going to increase my output. And I'm going to teach this guy and show this guy what I can do. And by the end of the season, you know, I was going to him and saying, like, Oscar, what do you think we should do? Because as far as I'm concerned, he'd lifted his game so much that he actually was the guy, in some cases, who was instructing me as to what we should do rather than the other way around. So my experience has always been set high standards and reward good behaviors and show the good people who do want to come with you that if they do come with you, that they themselves are set for a really bright future and that they're going to get promoted, they're going to get higher salaries, that they're going to get applauded, that the whole thing's going to be great. And if those people then become your Praetorian Guard and you're the people who really sort of believe in the whole process, then in a way, the less positive people have a choice to make, right? I either get on the bus or else I fall out the back of it, but they're not in a position to stage a mutiny anymore.
Let's talk about your target or the objective, or you put some outrageous target to break the record, the home ground record, right? You wanted to break the attendance record. We spoke about that on my radio show, but for those people who didn't really catch that show, why was it important for you to set such a lofty target for your staff?
Well, I didn't think it was a particularly lofty target. So Sunderland has got a very big stadium. It holds about 50,000 people. And in the Premier League, they were averaging crowds of around 46,000, something like this, 47,000. So there was no doubt that the fans were out there, right? Sunderland has a lot of fans, and that's a great thing for the club. That's what makes it a big club. So during the previous season in the Championship, attendances in terms of the people actually turning up to the stadium had dropped to around 22, 23,000, this kind of thing. So the first target I set was, I said, right, this is the biggest club, in my view, ever to be in the third division. And that was a controversial thing to say at the time. And certainly there were Manchester City and Leeds United and Sheffield Wednesday fans who disagreed with that, but I was quite sort of upfront. I think Sunderland's the biggest club ever to be in the third division. So the first target I set was, I think we need to beat the all-time average attendance record for the third division, which was Manchester City, who averaged 28,000 a game when they were in the third division. So that was the first target I set my staff, was the average attendance record. And then I said, while we're at it, why don't we also break the record for a one-game attendance? And since the highest attendance for most English football clubs in the season is on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas Day, I said, right, we've got a home game that day. Let's target that game to break the all-time record, so that then at the end of this season, we will hold the all-time average attendance record and the all-time single game record. The single game record was held by Leeds United at 38,300, which was for their playoff semi-final game when they got promoted from the division. So I said, okay, look, let's set a target of 40,000, which will mean that we break that record properly, not just by a few hundred, but we break it properly, and it's a good round number to focus on. And let's start breaking that challenge down into different parts. Who are these people? How do we get to them? How are we going to manage it? How do we market it to them? Because I said, I'm not going to sell a single ticket at a reduced price, right? No bargains, no bonuses. This has to be 40,000 people actually paying to be there. So it was great fun. It was a great fun campaign, and the staff who were positive really got on board, and they had something to aim at. Because so often in football, on the marketing side, people say, oh, if the team does well, then people come, and if the team doesn't do so well, people don't come. To which I say, okay, well, if you're in marketing, what's the point of you being there then? If the whole thing's just dependent on the team performance, then why are we paying £50,000 a year to you to be the marketing guy, right? Your job is to change things, is to do things regardless of what happens on the football side. So by setting those targets and by putting in place a program where they could input their ideas into achieving those targets, I wanted them to feel like they were owning the target, and that it was going to be their achievement if they achieved that target. And it was great to see, when it came through, I was actually at a conference in Berlin when it came through on December the 21st or December the 22nd that we'd sold 40,000 tickets by that point. And I did a Skype with the ticket office, and there were loads of people in there cheering and applauding each other and all this type of stuff. And I thought, okay, we're getting somewhere now. We're getting somewhere to the point where the staff have taken ownership. They've been creative. They've worked super hard. And as a team, they're celebrating together. And that was the point at which I thought, okay, this is starting to move in the right direction.
We have to talk about the fans, because in that series, you saw that the fans were really suffering. Like, they gave their life to Sunderland, and everything, their life, their daily lives, everything revolved around Sunderland. We know the fans up in the Northeast are passionate, of course, Newcastle fans and, of course, Sunderland fans. We spoke about this on radio, because you did say that it's not really that healthy to be so obsessed about your football club, didn't you?
I mean, it's great for me, right? As a football marketeer, it's fantastic. And I'm very grateful for it. And for Newcastle and Sunderland, it's a great safety blanket, because at other clubs, I think if you'd been as unsuccessful as Newcastle and Sunderland have been, then you would start to lose loyalty and support over time. But in Newcastle and Sunderland, it seems that there's still tens of thousands of people who want to pay to watch football, even though the football's normally not been that good. So I'm very grateful for it. I'm very grateful for the way in which the fans embraced what we were doing, and the way in which the fans continue to embrace what's happened. Even now this season, we're averaging more than 30,000 a game, which is still the highest ever seen in the third division. I think the point I made on your radio show is that if I was looking at it from just a neutral perspective, and I had no involvement with the football club, and I was a public health official, I would say, is this really a balanced outlook on life, to have your entire life bound up in the fortunes of 11 guys who you don't know running around a field is a strange place to end up in when you think about it that way. But at the same time, as the football club, it's just wonderful and amazing to be a part of something which can mean so much to so many people.
Let's talk about the Checkatrade Cup Finals, right? Because in that series, your wife at some point asked you to calm down and sit down. It was pretty funny. We all had a laugh about that one. Are you as animated at home as well?
I'll have to try and see if she's around to answer that question. My wife is wonderful, and she's German and very calm. And as you probably see, if you see us sitting next to each other, she's very, very blonde, very German looking. I'm quite dark, and I have more of a Latin temperament, and she has more of a German temperament, and we sort of balance each other out in that way. Sometimes she has to tell me to calm down a little bit. Sometimes I have to go, come on, this is great, isn't it? Isn't this fantastic? It amuses both of us that there were tens of millions of people around the world watching that, couples watching that, saying, oh, that is very funny. That's a married couple interacting with each other under pressure in a way that we all sort of understand. And she has to do that several times a year to me at football. That's not unusual. That happens quite a lot.
Yeah, that reminded my wife when we were watching. She said, "Oh, that's like me telling you to calm down when you watch Everton play."
Yeah.
But looking back, I mean, when you look at especially when we look at fans, right? We talked about the mental well-being. It means so much. I mean, I'm not a Sunderland fan. I don't know too much about the club. Just that they played the Premier League and stuff like that. But watching that series, just, you're emotionally drawn into Sunderland, the fans, what it means. Right at the end, the father and son, when you guys lost, and, they clap and they say, and the father goes to the son and say, come on, Sunderland till I die. That's like, the hair at the back of your neck stands out, because so passionate. People are so passionate about football. And especially now that, football, it's under lockdown. Can you imagine the mental well-being of those people? And how's the club dealing with that?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, the club is effectively locked down at the moment. Our staff are on furlough. The players are on furlough. So it's like a business in a cryogenic chamber at the moment. It's just been frozen in time. There's nothing happening. I think we've been really fortunate as a country that the last month, which has been the main lockdown month, has been great weather here. And this has meant that for a lot of people, I think, it's softened the blow of not being able to watch football and go about their normal lives, and that at least they've been able to be in their garden and sort of, have a nice walk every day in the sunshine, etc. It's just your spirits lift higher when it's sunny outside. I think it would have been really, really tough if we'd had a typical English month of rain for the last month. I think people would have really been missing the football then. But they've got to the point now in a funny way where a lot of people have got used to not having football. And, all I hope is that when it does come back, that people do quickly, regain their enthusiasm for it and want to go and watch it again. Of course, we're going to have a challenge in terms of whether people are going to be able to watch it live in the stadium. So it's going to be interesting to see how many people access our streaming platform to watch the matches on the streaming platform.
There's a lot of rumors going on behind the scenes, and also the media reporting that you guys are looking to sell the club. Any truth in that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main fans groups came to Stuart in December and asked him to sell the club. This isn't unusual. They've done the same to their last 5 owners. Some fans tend to want to eject their owner on a regular basis. And when I sort of felt a bit sort of put out about this, I was told by one of the former owners who said that when they were 7th in the Premier League, they were still trying to push him out the club then. But I think Stuart's view has always been he only wants to be the chairman and the owner as long as people want him to be there. He doesn't want to be there against people's will. He's not there for his ego. He's not there to try and make a lot of money. He was there to try and do it as a sporting challenge and to try and do it in partnership with the fans. And if the fans don't want him to be there, then okay. So he put the club up for sale because he felt the fans had asked him to put the club up for sale. It then transpired subsequently, both Stuart and I got thousands of letters from other fans saying, those fans don't speak for us. We want you to stay. And I think that put a different gloss on it, and gradually we realised that actually it was a more nuanced position than perhaps Stuart had thought. But I think nonetheless the position is that if a great new owner comes along who we think would be beneficial for the club, then we would sell the club to that person, because we want the club to succeed, and the club's now in a financially stable position. So we don't need to sell. We're in the best financial position of any club outside the Premier League now. We're debt free. We're pretty much break even. We're in a solid position, so we don't need to sell financially. But at the same time, you wouldn't want to deny those wonderful fans and that amazing club if some owner came along who said, look, okay, I'm gonna really take the bull by the horns here. I'm going to get them back in the Premier League as quickly as possible. Then it would be irresponsible for us to go, okay, look, thanks very much, but we'll see you in 5 years. So it's an ongoing conversation.
Do you think Jason Smith says from the UK? He asked you this question. He's asking you this question. Can you see Sunderland back in the Premier League in the next 5 years?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. 100%. Because the bottom line is that Sunderland's the biggest club outside of the Premier League, and will always should produce the most revenues of any club outside the Premier League. The problem is that for 10 years it was like a bucket with leaks in it, right? So by the time that we got there, just to give some illustration of that, by the time that we got there, the bank debt, the debt they owed to the bank was about £100 million. Wow. The interest on the bank debt was £9 million a year. The total amount of money that the fans paid to watch the club was £9 million a year. So every single penny that the fans paid went to the interest on the bank debt, right? So you can have the biggest club outside the Premier League, but until you're debt-free, until you're actually financially stable, then all those fans don't really necessarily go into the playing performance side of the club. It goes into filling the holes in your bucket and paying for chauffeurs and paying for people moving pot plants and all this kind of stuff. Now that the club is lean and tough and break-even and debt-free, from now on, of course, every penny that the Sunderland fans spend now goes into the playing side. And because Sunderland has many more fans than all the other clubs outside the Premier League, then, of course, in the end, the manager will get it right, and the recruitment people will get it right, and they'll have the right mix of players. And because they can afford to pay more than the other clubs outside the Premier League, those, in the end, they will get promoted. That's going to happen. I think what's been difficult for Sunderland fans is some assumption, particularly for those of them who don't really have any background in business, that you wave a magic wand one day and the past goes and the future starts. The reality of businesses is that once they are a leaky bucket, it's not a magic wand. It takes a while to turn that business into a strong, stable platform, which you can then move from. And I would say probably that's been finalized and finally achieved really in the last 2 or 3 months.
Russell has got this question for you. He says, have you sorted out your recruitment now? Or so the same mistakes are not made again?
Yeah, it was a great question. I mean, again, the playing side of the club has not been my responsibility. That's not me distancing myself. That's just me saying that it's not my professional expertise. So it would be wrong for me to say that this was right, this was wrong. Having said that, what happened when we came in was there was a very large recruitment department at Sunderland that had manifestly failed over a number of years. It spent a lot of money and they hadn't achieved a successful team. So the recruitment department had failed. So we had to strip it back to then rebuild it again. And really, again, I think that system and that process only really was in place by maybe October of last year. So we're still in the early days of that system bedding in, and the scouts, when you have a head of scouting for the southeast of England, you have a head of scouting for Scandinavia, you have a head of scouting for continental Europe, you have a head of scouting for Scotland. Once you have these people in place, again, unfortunately, it's not a magic wand. It doesn't suddenly mean that you just instantly sign loads of great players the next day. These people have to start to work together. They have to have processes which feed into a central function. You have to have the data analytics in place to assess at the central function what the scouts are telling you and all this kind of stuff. So it's a build process. If you look at this is what I try and say to some of the Sunderland fans who are amazing, enthusiastic, passionate, but not patient. And most football fans aren't patient, but in the Northeast, patience is not even a quality they even admire. I mean, patience in the south of England, at least, even if people don't have it, they at least see that it's a good quality. In the Northeast, patience is seen as being something which is not a good thing fundamentally. But if you look at what's happened at Liverpool, obviously we believe that Liverpool are going to win the league this year for the first time in 30 years. And the process of Liverpool reinventing itself to be a real power at the top table didn't happen with a magic wand. Even Jurgen Klopp has not been a magic wand. This has been a 5-year process of building the right data analytics department, of getting the right people in the right positions working together, of Klopp having enough pre-seasons to work with the players and the fitness coaches having enough time to condition the players so they can play at the same tempo for a long time. And in some ways, it's a message which is really hard to give football fans, which is this time 2 years ago, Sunderland were the least successful team in British football history. In the whole history of British football, no team had lost that many matches over a 5-year period. I know it's difficult to believe this, but they'd finished, if you can tell me another team who had finished bottom of the Premier League and then bottom of the Championship in consecutive years, I'll give you a prize, and I'm telling you because there isn't one. Hasn't happened before, right? They finished bottom by 8 points of the Premier League and then bottom by 6 points of the Championships. They weren't even just finishing bottom; they were finishing bottom by a long way. So turning that runaway train around and getting it heading in the right direction is not an easy task. And it's not actually my task because I'm not involved in the professional football side of the club, but I am, I think, able to see that it's unfair to expect suddenly a club that has spent £280 million achieving the worst results in British football history to suddenly turn itself into a powerhouse in 2 years when it took Liverpool 5 years. You know, in reality, it's an incremental improvement. Every transfer window, you want to see fewer mistakes being made. Every transfer window, you want to see a more structured process being driven through every single transfer window. And I think if you look at the transfer windows that we've been through, you'll see that every transfer window we're making fewer mistakes.
Right. We need to talk about Luke O'Nien because he is very closely linked to Singapore. Everyone's hoping that he will at some point play for Singapore. What is he like as a player?
Well, I think the first thing to talk about with Luke is what he's like as a man.
Yeah.
And Luke is probably the best guy that I've met in football. I mean, he is just a positive force of nature. It wouldn't matter whether Luke O'Nien was a footballer, an accountant, a lawyer, or a lifeguard. He would just be the best that he possibly could be at everything he ever did. He's one of these guys who's just got this amazing drive, and it's all positive energy with Luke. Everything is positive. And he came to the Northeast, and the first few games that he played, he was pretty crap. And he found the transition really difficult. And he came in one day into my office and just plonked himself down on the sofa. And this is a player. This is a 23-year-old player. Players normally can't even look the chief executive in the face, right? This guy came in, plonked himself down on the sofa, and he said, "Charlie, I'm struggling." And for the next half an hour, he talked me through what his struggles were. And I just nodded and listened and nodded and listened and asked a few questions. And at the end, he said, "Thanks for that. I feel better." He goes, "I'm going to go and do it." And it was amazing to see, the other players would leave at lunchtime, leave the training ground at lunchtime, and Luke would be there all afternoon doing more exercises, more drills, more gym work, more fitness work. And he was just absolutely focused on becoming the best player he possibly could be. And from that start, he's now the first name on the team sheet. Yeah, he is the first name on the team sheet. There's no way that he's left out of that team ever.
Maybe that's because he's got a bit of the Singapore DNA in him.
Honestly, having met his parents, I think that's true.
Really? Okay. I will take that as a...
Just the work ethic. The work ethic is unbelievable.
There's a question from Raj. He says, you are in Oxford. You went to uni there. Any thoughts of collaboration with the university and data analytics? Well,
that was definitely something that if we'd taken over Oxford that we wanted to do. And it's a conversation I'm now having with Sunderland University on this topic. Really, in the last 5 months since I took a step back from the club, because my wife's been we just had a baby. So I've spent a lot of that time working with 2 data analytics professors because it was an area where I felt, okay, I don't come from a professional football background, but I do come from an academic background and I do understand these processes. So really for the last 5 or 6 months, I've been working with data analytics people to try and understand and put in place the systems that I think can really take it forward. And then separately, I've been having a conversation with Sunderland University that's got a very good tech and IT departments. It's really a technical college by origin, about how we can look at forming a joint institution going forward, really a sort of national institute for pursuing these topics. Because with Sunderland being such a city so identified with football and the university being right pretty much right next to the football club, and with a lot of people at the university being people who are Sunderland fans, who come from Sunderland, but who have that technical ability, I think there's a really exciting opportunity there to forge new ground. The kind of new ground that currently is being forged in Germany mostly. This is where the current frontier of data analytics is in Germany. And what I'm trying to do is find a way for the UK to catch up for lost time, and then hopefully forge ahead in its own way. But you have to do that in collaboration with the university, as your caller says. Right.
Just before I let you go, I know we've been talking for almost an hour plus now. What's next for Charlie Methven?
Well, as I said, we've got a newborn child.
Yeah. Congrats.
And
welcome
to the
club.
Very much. I've got two by my first marriage.
Okay.
This is who are teenagers now, and we have over the weekend meeting their new sister. So we're pretty busy with that right now. I've got my day job, which is political and public relations consultancy. And despite the lockdown, I've still got a couple of clients who are quite busy in that regard. And then, really looking to get back involved in football, but probably, more on the data analytics side. Data analytics, and also how data analytics affects on the marketing side as well. So I've been able to use these last few months to really refresh my energy and to really go out. I've visited a lot of other clubs, a lot of universities and colleges who look at these things to try to see and get inspired by what the next wave of technology affecting football is going to be. And I am inspired, and I think that's where I really want to take it next.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I think the last message that's coming in, say, hi, Charlie, I'm following Sunderland AFC very closely. Is there a possibility of season 3, Netflix season 3, Sunderland Till I Die?
Yeah. It's a great question. We've had production companies and TV channels from all over the world contact us since season 2 became obviously a big global success. And I think there's a lot of appetite for that. And maybe for it to come out a bit more often than once every 12 or 13 months, so that people can keep updated a bit more with what's going on behind the scenes at the club.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you back from your baby. I know it's quite early in the morning in the UK. Thank you so much. All the best. And again, you're really kind to commit your time to this interview.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.